I'm Rantasmo, and Star Trek needs more gay. Star Trek is a big deal. The original series practically defined science fiction as a respectable genre. It gave rise to the entire concept of fandom as we know it. It's one of the most culturally influential franchises in history, and it's especially renowned for its groundbreaking handling of social issues and representations of minorities. So it seems a little bit odd that after 50 years and about 1 billion different types of foreheads, we now officially have one gay guy. In the recently released Star Trek Beyond, Hikaru Sulu, helmsman of the Enterprise, played by John Cho, and previously played by George Takei in the original series, is portrayed as having a daughter and, in a very brief appearance, a husband. It's a really short scene, they don't even kiss or anything, it's just sort of like a bro hug situation. But even so, this has created something of a stir, since according to George Takei, Sulu was originally intended to be straight. Takei has voiced concerns that while having LGBT representation in Star Trek is long overdue, retconning the sexuality of an established character does a disservice to the vision of Star Trek creator Gene Roddenberry. The screenwriters have in turn argued that this version of Sulu is not just the same character from the original series transplanted into a new story, but rather an entirely new incarnation of the character. Bear with me here, because things are about to get even nerdier. The J.J. Abrams Star Trek movies are set in an alternate timeline, the so-called Kelvin timeline. And screenwriter Simon Pegg has explained that even though Sulu was technically born before the timeline split, the event that caused the split created ripples in reality that affected both the past and the future of that entire plane of existence, effectively creating not only an alternate timeline, but an alternate reality with many subtle differences, including Chekhov being born several years earlier, Khan being surgically turned into a British white guy, no, seriously, that's what happens, read the comics, and Sulu being gay. I'm fully aware that this is a very convenient in-universe explanation for things like continuity discrepancies and whitewashing. It's kind of on par with "a wizard did it" when it comes to hand-wavy justifications. But personally, the quantum physics of Sulu's gayness aren't really what's important to me. One way or another, I think it's fair to say that J.J. Abrams' Star Trek universe is already significantly different from Roddenberry's. At least it seems like this instance of "a wizard did it" is being used for the sake of deliberately adding texture and interest to the universe, instead of just a flimsy excuse for laziness. I don't agree, as Pegg and some others have said, that adding a new gay character to the story would necessarily make them a token, though I'm sure plenty of people would see them that way. And while I do think it's important that we have characters who are incidentally LGBT in a way that isn't treated like a big deal, we also need to move away from the idea that that's an inherently better representation. I can also see how making Sulu queer as opposed to Kirk or Scotty or Uhura or any of the other main characters is a bit of an obvious choice. But overall, I feel like this is a positive change that's very much in line with Star Trek's long history of social progressivism. The Star Trek franchise takes place in a future where human society has evolved into a progressive utopia, or something very close to one. Poverty and disease have been wiped out, and prejudice and oppression based on gender, race, and sexuality is largely a thing of the past. Or at least, so we are told. But things get a little more complicated when it comes to what we've actually been shown in the Star Trek movies and TV shows up to this point. While Star Trek has never shied away from exploring issues related to gender and sexuality, they've almost always dealt with it in a very analogous, metaphorical way. This usually means that the crew will encounter an alien species with societal prejudices that roughly mirror the ones we experience in the real world. For instance, in the Next Generation episode The Outcast, we meet a race of androgynous aliens from the planet of expeditious haircuts who have essentially outlawed gender and sexual attraction from their society. When one of the aliens reveals that she's attracted to Riker and identifies as female, she's forced to undergo a form of reparative therapy to cure her of her perversion. Similarly, the Enterprise episode Stigma deals with the Vulcans and their systemic prejudice against what they believe to be a minority of their species, born with the ability to mind meld, and thus able to spread a mentally transmitted disease that's a thinly veiled metaphor for HIV/AIDS. Star Trek is well known for handling the theme of racial prejudice through these same sorts of alien metaphors. But the franchise has also dealt with race in more explicit, direct, and tangible ways, not just within the themes of individual episodes, but through the show's casting and characterization. It's clear that the showrunners considered racial diversity a high priority. People of color were often seen in positions of power and prestige, and the original series was one of the first shows to feature an interracial kiss. That same explicitness wasn't quite there when it came to LGBT people. The closest we ever really got was a few aliens who were some variation on pansexual, usually because they came from a culture where virtually the entire species was pansexual. For instance, the Trill are a race of symbiotes who inhabit various bodies throughout their lifetime, and as a result, have a fairly fluid view of gender and sexuality. In one episode of Deep Space Nine, which is by far the gayest of all the Star Treks, a major Trill character reconnects with another Trill whom they were romantically involved with in their respective past lives. This itself is a major taboo in Trill society, and it serves as yet another metaphor for queerness and the stigma surrounding it. But the fact that both hosts are female doesn't seem to be that big of a deal. There was also the Changelings, a race of shapeshifters who take the whole sexually fluid thing a bit more literally, in that they actually turn into fluid and get all up in each other's business. This can easily be seen as a form of intercourse, and on at least one occasion we see it take place between two male-presenting characters. One possible exception to the pansexual species rule is Garrick the Cardassian Tailor, also from Deep Space Nine. Cardassians aren't uniformly pansexual, but actor Andrew Robinson originally intended for Garrick to be portrayed as such, and there is a certain flamboyance detectable in his performance.
I'm so glad to have made such an interesting new friend today.
But this aspect of the character was never really fully explored. And when it came to actual humans in any sort of queer relationship, we've basically been SOL up until now, apart from a few non-canonical novels. This was not for lack of demand from fans. In fact, the perceived sexual tension between Kirk and Spock has long been cited as having birthed the entire slash-fiction genre. George Takei has said that he asked Roddenberry to add a gay character to the original series, but there had been so much backlash over the aforementioned interracial kiss that Roddenberry feared a gay character would lead to the show's cancellation. Later, there was an episode of Next Generation in the works entitled Blood and Fire that would have included two gay crew members, but that episode was never filmed thanks to some homophobic meddling from higher-ups behind the scenes. It was later converted into an episode of the fan-made series Star Trek New Voyages, and the gay characters were upgraded into much more prominent roles, one of them being Captain Kirk's nephew. Sulu being briefly, barely noticeably gay in the new movie might seem like a comparatively small step forward, and it kind of is, but I think it's a step forward nonetheless. And with Brian Fuller at the helm, I have to believe that the upcoming Star Trek Discovery will finally boldly go where no Star Trek series has gone before, and will finally get the gay space makeouts we've all been waiting for.